Hello, I'm Elise Vance, the author of the channel Borrowed Lives, and I offer you fascinating stories. Like and subscribe to my channel.
1. You have got to be kidding me. Those were the exact words that came out of my husband's mouth as he stood frozen in the rain on our gravel driveway. He had a heavy leather duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and beside him, a woman in an expensive suede trench coat was trying to protect her blow-dry with a silk scarf. The bottle of vintage wine she'd been holding slipped from her manicured fingers and crashed onto the flagstone steps, splashing red across the stone. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Not Julian, not his glossy companion, not the neighbor trimming his hedges across the lane, and certainly not me. I stood in the doorway of the converted stone barn where I'd spent the last 24 years of my life, holding a thick ivory folder against my ribs. Then I smiled. It was a calm, genuine smile, the kind I hadn't felt in years. To understand why Julian Vance looked like he'd just seen a ghost on that damp autumn afternoon, you have to go back 7 days. Back to a cold Thursday evening, back to the kitchen island, back to the exact moment my marriage disintegrated. My name is Eleanor Mercer. I am 51 years old, and until last fall, I thought my life followed a steady, comfortable routine. I lived in a quiet valley in Vermont. Every morning, I brewed dark roast coffee, watched the mist rise off the pond, and tended to the administrative side of our landscape architecture firm. Julian had built the brand's public reputation, but I had managed the operational budget, client contracts, subcontractor logistics, and vendor accounts for over 2 decades. People always referred to it as Julian's firm. I never corrected them. I didn't care about the spotlight. I cared about keeping the engine running. That Thursday had started like any other. I spent the day reconciling invoices and scheduling crew routes. Julian arrived home around 6:45. He barely met my eyes when he walked through the mudroom. I assumed he was exhausted. Autumn was always our busiest season, but his energy was strange. He was unnaturally composed, almost like an actor stepping onto a stage. We sat down for dinner at 7 o'clock sharp. Julian set his fork down before he'd even taken 3 bites. We need to talk about the future. I set my glass down. All right. He folded his hands over his napkin. No hesitation, no visible tremor in his voice. Sienna is moving in at the end of the month. I blinked, taking a second to process the name. Sienna. Sienna, he repeated, as if stating the obvious. Sienna Brooks. A commercial interior designer we'd collaborated with on a boutique hotel project 6 months prior. She was 34, sharp, and drove a sports car that roared down rural roads. I stared at him. The sentence felt surreal, like line dialogue from a play I hadn't auditioned for. I let out a dry, incredulous laugh. Is this a joke? It's not, he replied coldly. What do you mean she's moving in? Julian looked past me, toward the fireplace, then back. We've been together for over a year. A year. 14 months of quiet side trips, secret calls, and calculated distance. Why? I asked simply. He let out a short sigh, looking exasperated. Sienna brings out a side of me I haven't felt in a decade. I'm tired of just existing, Eleanor. I want a fresh chapter. I didn't throw my plate. I didn't scream. When shock hits you that hard, it paralyzes your vocal cords. I just sat there, listening as my husband of 24 years dismantled our life with the efficiency of a corporate manager laying off an employee. And here's the reality, Julian added, leaning forward. You'll need to vacate the property by Sunday. Sunday? I echoed. That's 3 days. It's more than enough time for you to pack your personal effects and find an apartment in town, he said smoothly. The property stays with me. The firm stays with me. He spoke with total certainty, the confidence of a man who believed the entire world operated on his terms. The anger didn't hit me right then. Instead, a deep, icy clarity settled over me. I remembered something my father used to tell me when I was young: never interrupt a man while he is busy making a massive mistake. I leaned back, met his gaze, and simply said, if that's what you think is going to happen. He looked surprised by how easily I surrendered, and a look of immense relief washed over his face. He thought I was beaten. That carelessness was his first mistake. Julian went to bed early that night, sound asleep as if he had just closed a successful business deal. I didn't sleep at all. Around midnight, I climbed the creaky wooden stairs to the barn loft where my late father had kept his workspace. The air smelled of dried pine, old paper, and motor oil. My father, Thomas Mercer, had been a stubborn civil engineer who trusted clear boundaries, paper trails, and very little else. When Julian and I bought this old farm property 24 years ago, my father had insisted on funding the down payment and managing the purchase logistics himself. Tucked under an old drafting table, I found a rusted metal lockbox. Across the lid, my father's handwriting read, "Mercer Property and Trust." I carried the box down to the kitchen. The lock was long broken. Daddy always said locks were only for honest people anyway. Inside were yellowed land surveys, tax receipts, and a thick blue document from a legal practice in Burlington. I opened the folder. Skimming through the dense legal jargon, a specific phrase stopped me cold: the Thomas Mercer Family Revocable Land Trust. I read it twice, then a third time. The title to the house and the surrounding 30 acres had never been issued to Julian and me as joint tenants. My father had placed the entire real estate asset directly into a trust. I was listed as the sole primary beneficiary upon his passing. Julian's name appeared nowhere on the deed or the governing trust agreement. My husband had spent 2 decades assuming that because his name was on the utility bills and the business stationery, he owned the ground beneath his feet. By sunrise, I was sitting at the dining table with a legal pad and a hot cup of tea. When Julian came downstairs in his running gear, he gave me a patronizing look. "Making a packing list?" he asked. "Something like that," I replied calmly. "What are your plans for the weekend?" "Sienna and I are driving to a resort in Montreal," he said, stretching his shoulders. "We'll be back Sunday afternoon. I expect you to have your key on the counter by then." "Enjoy Montreal," I said with a faint smile. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I called the law firm listed on the document. The original attorney had retired, but the firm had merged with a larger practice in Burlington called Vance, Hayes, and Miller. By 10 o'clock, I was sitting in a high-rise office overlooking Lake Champlain, facing a senior estate attorney named Arthur Vance, no relation to Julian, thankfully. Arthur spent 20 minutes carefully reviewing the trust documents and checking county clerk databases on his computer. Finally, he removed his reading glasses and looked at me. "Mrs. Mercer, your husband has zero legal authority to evict you from this property," Arthur said plainly. "In fact, he doesn't own a single square foot of it." A wave of relief washed over me so fast I felt lightheaded. He genuinely believes it's his. "People often mistake occupancy for ownership," Arthur noted dryly. "Furthermore, looking over these business filings you brought, your landscape firm is registered as an equal partnership. He cannot legally bar you from the business or its assets without a formal dissolution agreement." Arthur advised me to stay quiet, stay put, and let Julian proceed with his plans until the legal notices were officially served. When I returned home, I found Julian in the entry hall measuring the alcove where my grandmother's oak cabinet stood. "Sienna wants to put a modern art piece here," he remarked casually without looking at me. "Make sure this cabinet is gone by Sunday." "I'll make sure everything is taken care of," I said. By Friday morning, Julian had packed his bag, loaded it into his sports sedan, and set off for Montreal to pick up Sienna. Before driving away, he paused by the driver's window and said, "Have a good life, Eleanor. Leave the garage door opener on the kitchen island." "Safe drive," I replied, holding my coffee mug with both hands. The second his car disappeared around the bend, the quiet afternoon turned into a hive of activity. My lifelong neighbor, Evelyn, walked across the field carrying a freshly baked pie. Evelyn was 76, sharper than a razor, and knew every piece of town history. She found me in the kitchen surrounded by legal files instead of packing boxes. "I saw Julian leave," Evelyn said, setting the pie on the counter. "And I saw that flashy red car parked down the lane earlier this week. Are you all right, dear?" I gave her the abbreviated version of the truth. Evelyn listened silently, her jaw tightening. When I finished, she patted my hand firmly. "That man always acted like he invented sunshine," she said. "What do you need me to do?" "Just stay close," I smiled. Things might get loud on Sunday. Over the next 48 hours, Arthur Vance's legal team worked with quiet, relentless speed. On Saturday morning, a licensed locksmith arrived at the stone barn. By noon, every single lock on the house, garage, and office outbuilding had been replaced with heavy-duty smart locks. Meanwhile, Arthur dropped another bombshell during a mid-afternoon phone call. "Eleanor, we audited the commercial bank records for the firm," Arthur explained. "Julian took out an unauthorized collateral loan 6 months ago, using the company's equipment as security. Because you are a 50% partner, he committed a serious regulatory violation by forging your implied consent. He was trying to fund Sienna's new design studio," I realized aloud. "Precisely," Arthur said. "He played a dangerous hand, assuming you'd sign whatever papers he handed you during a hasty divorce. We have issued an immediate freeze on all business credit lines and served notice to the bank." By Sunday afternoon, everything was set. Arthur, a process server, and Evelyn sat in my living room enjoying tea. At precisely 5:15 p.m., the sound of crunching gravel announced Julian's return. Through the mullioned glass window, I watched his car pull up to the front steps. Sienna stepped out, holding her designer handbag and a chilled bottle of champagne, ready to celebrate her new countryside home. Julian strolled up the flagstone walkway, carrying his duffel bag, looking relaxed and victorious. He reached for the front door handle, inserted his key, and turned it. Nothing happened. He tried again, harder this time. The key wouldn't even fit into the new bronze keyway. "What's wrong?" Sienna asked, taking a step closer. "The key, it stuck," Julian muttered, his brow furrowing. That was when he noticed the formal white envelope taped neatly at eye level on the oak door, bearing the crest of Vance, Hayes, and Miller. Julian tore the envelope open. As his eyes scanned the official court summons and property trust declaration, the color drained from his face so fast he looked ghost white. Sienna leaned over his arm, reading over his shoulder. "Julian, what does unlawful entry and sole trust beneficiary mean? Is this house not yours?" Julian's grip loosened. The champagne bottle slipped from Sienna's hand, crashing onto the stone steps below. No, this can't be happening," Julian whispered, his voice cracking. He rushed toward the window, hammering his fists against the frame. "Eleanor, open this door right now." I opened the heavy oak door just a few inches, looking out at him with absolute calm. "Is there a problem, Julian?" Julian stared at me through the gap in the doorway, his chest heaving. "What did you do to the locks? What is this nonsense taped to the door?" Arthur Vance stepped up behind me, holding a black leather briefcase. "Mr. Vance, I am Arthur Vance, legal counsel representing the Thomas Mercer Trust and Mrs. Eleanor Mercer. The paperwork in your hands outlines your immediate legal status. You are currently attempting to access property fully owned by a trust of which you are neither an owner nor a beneficiary." Julian's jaw dropped. "That's impossible. We bought this place 24 years ago. Your late father-in-law structured the acquisition," Arthur replied smoothly. "You were permitted occupancy as Eleanor's spouse. You have no legal title to this real estate. Furthermore, we have served notice to your primary lender regarding the unauthorized commercial loan you secured against firm assets. All corporate accounts have been temporarily frozen pending a forensic audit." Sienna's head snapped toward Julian, her eyes wide with shock. "You told me you owned the estate outright. You told me you were buying out her share of the firm." "Sienna, wait, let me explain," Julian stammered, reaching out toward her. "Explain what?" she snapped, backing down the walkway toward the car. "That you dragged me into a legal nightmare? You don't even own the roof over your head." Without another word, Sienna threw her bags back into the trunk, got into the driver's seat of her sports sedan, slammed the door, and sped down the gravel driveway, leaving a cloud of dust behind her. Julian stood completely alone on the damp flagstones, surrounded by broken glass, spilled wine, and legal notices. He looked smaller, depleted, and utterly ruined. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "Eleanor, please. We can talk about this." "We will talk," I said quietly. "Through our attorneys." I closed the door and turned the lock. 6 months later, the legal proceedings concluded. Julian agreed to surrender his remaining claims in the landscape architecture firm in exchange for my agreement not to press formal charges over the unauthorized loan. He moved into a small rented apartment in another county and took a mid-level job at a corporate nursery. Sienna was long gone. As for me, I kept the stone barn. I took full control of the design firm, rebranded it under my father's family name, and brought on two brilliant young landscape architects to expand our operations. Sometimes, late in the evening, I sit on the porch with a hot mug of tea, watching the fireflies light up the meadow across the pond. I don't feel anger toward Julian anymore. Bitterness is too heavy a burden to carry around. Real strength isn't about shouting or seeking revenge. It's about quietly holding your ground, knowing your worth, and allowing people to face the consequences of their own choices while you build a life filled with peace.